A billionaire offered a homeless single mother $50,000 to carry his child, and when she said no, he doubled it. She still said no. That was the moment Daniel Hartwell realized he had met someone he did not know how to buy. He had been standing outside the shelter on Clement Street in San Francisco when he first saw her. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of gray and damp that makes the whole city feel like it's running behind schedule. Daniel hadn't planned to stop there. His driver had taken a wrong turn, and Daniel had stepped out to take a call, rather than sit in traffic breathing recycled air. He was on the phone with his attorney, talking about the surrogacy contract that had just fallen apart for the third time, when he noticed the woman sitting on the shelter's front steps with a little girl asleep across her lap. The woman was maybe 28. She had dark circles under her eyes and paint-stained fingers, and she was reading a worn paperback with the kind of focused quiet that people only have when they've learned how to disappear inside themselves. The little girl's shoes were tied with 2 different colored laces, one pink, one white, and someone had drawn a small sun on the toe of the left one in permanent marker. Daniel finished his call. He kept looking at her. He was 39 years old, and he had spent the last 2 years trying to have a child through proper channels, the way a man like him did things: structured, contracted, controlled. His ex-fiancée had left 18 months ago, taking with her any plan he'd had for a conventional family. His mother had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia the following spring, and in one of her clearer moments, she had looked at him across the kitchen table and said, "Daniel, I need to meet your child before I can't remember your name anymore." He had not been able to stop thinking about that sentence. His attorneys had found 2 surrogates. Both had backed out. His fertility consultant had suggested he consider a different approach, find someone independently, someone who needed financial stability, formalize the arrangement privately. It had sounded transactional and cold when she said it. Standing on Clement Street looking at the woman with the paint-stained fingers, it still sounded transactional and cold. He walked over anyway. Her name was Nora Callahan. She told him that flatly, without warmth, the way people state their name to someone they expect to be rude to them. She had been staying at the shelter for 6 weeks with her daughter Mackie, who was 4. They had left a housing situation that Nora described only as not safe, and she was waiting on a Section 8 application and picking up weekend shifts at a bakery on Irving Street. She did not ask why he was asking. She just answered, and then looked back at her book. Daniel told her what he wanted. He said it directly because he didn't know how to say it any other way. He told her about his mother. He told her about the surrogacy contracts that had fallen through. He told her the number. Nora closed her book on her finger to keep her place. She looked at him for a long moment the way someone looks at a ceiling when they're doing math in their head. Then she said no. He said, "I can go higher." She said, "I know you can. That's not the problem." She opened her book again. He stood there for another moment, which was unusual for him, because Daniel Hartwell was not a man who stood around. He asked her what the problem was. She looked up again. "You don't want a family," she said. "You want a product. And I already have a daughter. I know the difference." He thought about that for 3 days. On the 4th day he went back to the shelter, and this time he didn't mention money. He asked if he could sit down. Nora looked at him sideways and moved her coat off the step. Mackie was awake this time, eating a graham cracker with systematic seriousness, breaking it into identical squares before eating each one. Daniel asked Nora about the paintings. He had noticed on his first visit a rolled canvas sticking out of her bag. She hesitated, then showed him. They were small, detailed watercolors of ordinary things. A cracked sidewalk square with a dandelion growing through it, a row of mailboxes, a fire hydrant with a pigeon standing on it. They were very good. He didn't say they're very good because that would have sounded like a line. He just looked at them for a while and said, "The pigeon looks annoyed." Nora almost smiled, almost. He came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. He brought coffee black for himself, and he asked her once what she liked in hers, and after that he got it right. He did not bring anything for Mackie, because he'd read enough about kids to know you don't try to win a child over with gifts in front of a protective parent. Instead, he talked to Mackie directly, at her level, as if she were a small person with opinions worth taking seriously, because she was. Mackie told him that her stuffed rabbit's name was Gerald, that graham crackers were better than crackers, and that pigeons were actually very smart and people were mean to them for no reason. "I think I agree with you," Daniel said. Maki looked at him appraisingly. "You should probably feed some," she said. He started bringing a small bag of birdseed on Tuesdays. He was aware, in a distant and uncomfortable way, that this had stopped being a transaction several weeks before he was ready to admit it. He was also aware that Nora knew this and was watching him figure it out, with the patience of someone who had learned not to rush people toward conclusions they weren't ready for. In early December, a cold front came through the city, and the shelter's heating system struggled to keep up. Daniel had a property, a furnished guest apartment above the garage of his house in Pacific Heights. He had offered it to Nora with language that was careful and practical. Short-term, no obligation, a written arrangement with whatever terms she wanted. He half expected her to say no again. She said, "Maki's been coughing for a week." "Yes, but I want it in writing that I can leave whenever I want with no notice and no penalty." "Obviously," Daniel said. "And I pay rent. That's unnecessary." "Then I'm not interested," he said. "Fine. $200 a month," she said. $800. He looked at her. She looked back. He said, $650 and I throw in parking." She moved in the following Saturday. The apartment was small and separate and had its own entrance, which mattered to Nora. She had assembled a reading list of tenant rights information before she arrived, which Daniel found when she accidentally left it on the kitchen counter during the one time she came inside the main house to use the washing machine, which the garage apartment didn't have. He didn't mention it. He thought it was one of the most reasonable things he'd ever seen anyone do. Maki, freed from the shelter and its fluorescent lights and its schedule of organized activities, expanded like a plant moved into a window. She found Daniel's back garden on the second day and stood at the gate looking at it with a level of want that was painful to witness. "You can go in," Daniel said. He was in the kitchen, and he had not intended her to hear, but she did. She turned around. "Will you come too?" He hadn't been in the back garden in 3 months. He put on his coat and went. They spent 40 minutes identifying which plants were still alive in November and which were not, a project Maki approached with the seriousness of a diagnostician. Gerald the rabbit was propped against a stone planter and consulted periodically on unclear cases. Daniel, who had hired a landscaper and had not once in 4 years of ownership actually spent time in his own garden, found himself explaining what he knew about the rosemary plant in the corner, which was apparently still alive and thriving and did not need them at all. Nora watched from the apartment window for a while. Daniel saw her once and didn't wave. She didn't wave either. But she was still there when he looked again 10 minutes later. Christmas came. Daniel's mother, Eleanor, was having a better stretch and came for dinner. She was 71 and still sharp on good days, and within 15 minutes of meeting Nora she had said, "You're the one from the shelter," in a tone that was more observational than accusatory, and then had asked to see the watercolors. Nora brought the portfolio she kept in a flat case under the apartment bed. Eleanor looked through every painting slowly, without commentary, and then looked up at her son with an expression Daniel recognized from childhood. The look that meant pay attention. After Eleanor left that evening, Nora washed up the dishes while Maki slept on Daniel's couch under a blanket she had dragged in herself. Daniel sat at the counter and felt the specific discomfort of a man who has spent his entire adult life engineering outcomes, watching something happen that he did not engineer and does not want to stop. "My mother liked you," he said. "Your mother liked my paintings," Nora said. "She doesn't separate people from their work." Nora put a bowl on the drying rack. "She's a good person, she is. She's scared." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Yes." Nora turned around and dried her hands on the dish towel. "She told me she has dementia, while you were getting dessert. She wasn't scared about herself." She looked at him. "She was scared about you, about what happens to you after." He didn't say anything. "I just thought you should know what she's actually worried about," Nora said, "since you're not the kind of person who asks." She picked up Maki, who was small enough to stay asleep through the transfer, and carried her back to the apartment. In January, Nora got a call back from a gallery on Hayes Street that had seen her work through a local arts program. It was a small show, 6 pieces, but it was real. She told Daniel at 6:30 in the morning because she was standing in the garden when he came out to get the paper, and she was holding her phone and looking at it, and Maki was still asleep and there was no one else to tell. That's not a small thing, Daniel said. I know, she said. She was trying not to smile too hard. He could tell she was rationing it. You should tell them you want a solo show eventually. She looked at him. I've been staying in your garage apartment for 2 months. I know where you've been staying. I'm talking about where you're going. He picked up the paper. Tell them. She got the solo show. It was scheduled for the following October. February was when things shifted in the way that cannot be paused or scheduled. It started as nothing. Daniel working late, Nora in the kitchen with the light on painting in miniature at the table she'd pushed against the window. Maki had a cold and was asleep early, and the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. Daniel came in to get water and stayed to watch her mix a particular shade of gray-blue for 20 minutes without saying a word because he couldn't make himself leave. You can sit down, Nora said without looking up. He sat down. They talked until 2 in the morning about things that had nothing to do with arrangements or agreements. She told him about growing up in Fresno, with a mother who worked doubles at a nursing home and a brother who had made it to a Division II soccer scholarship and then blown out his knee in the second season. She told him about Maki's father, who she said she would only discuss once, which meant Daniel listened very carefully. He had been someone she trusted. He had proved untrustworthy in ways that had scared her, not just disappointed her. She had left. The exit had cost her everything she'd saved. Daniel told her about the company he had built. Not the revenue or the structure, but the first 18 months, when he was 26, and sleeping in the office and eating vending machine dinners and terrified every single day that it would fail. He told her about his father, who had left when Daniel was 11, and whom he had not spoken to in over 2 decades. He told her that he had been engaged once, and that it had ended not because of a single dramatic event, but because he had spent 3 years making every decision in that relationship, as if he were the only person it affected, and eventually she had gotten tired of not mattering. That's honest, Nora said. I've had time to think about it. Do you do that differently now? He considered. I'm trying to. She looked at him in the low kitchen light. I know, she said. They sat in that quiet for a moment. Then Nora said she had to sleep, and Daniel said yes, and they both stood up carefully, the way people do when they don't want to break something. March brought a setback neither of them had planned for. Daniel's company had a quarterly earnings call that went badly. Not catastrophically, but badly enough that he withdrew. It was a pattern Nora had not seen before. He went quiet, he worked 18-hour days, he stopped coming to the garden. For 10 days the apartment felt like something sealed. Nora left a container of soup on the kitchen counter once. He left a thank you note under the apartment door 2 days later. It was the most formal thing she'd seen from him in months. On a Sunday night she knocked on the main house door at 9 o'clock. He opened it. He looked exhausted. You're doing it again, she said. He said, doing what? Acting like you're the only one this affects. She said it carefully but directly, the way she said most things. He was quiet. Then he stepped back and let her in. They sat in the living room. He talked about the earnings call, the investor pressure, the board member who had been angling against him for 2 years. He talked about it like someone releasing pressure from a valve, not expecting solutions. Nora mostly listened. She asked 2 questions, both precise, both about things he hadn't considered. He stared at her. Where did that come from? He said. I grew up watching my mother manage impossible budgets, Nora said. You get good at seeing which numbers are noise and which ones are structural. He sent one of her questions to his CFO the next morning. His CFO called back within the hour. April was the gallery framing Nora's 6 pieces and Daniel driving her to every supply run because her car, a 2009 Civic that she had described as having opinions, had chosen that month to develop a transmission issue she couldn't afford to fix. He did not offer to fix it. He offered to drive her. She let him. Maki came on Saturdays and sat in the back seat with Gerald and gave turn-by-turn directions with total authority and only occasional accuracy. It was on one of those Saturdays that Maki looked up from the back seat and said, "Are you and Mommy dating?" The car was stopped at a red light on Van Ness. Daniel looked in the rearview mirror and then at the windshield. "No," Nora said. "Why not?" Maki said. "Because that's complicated," Nora said. Maki considered this. "Gerald thinks you are," she said, and looked out the window. The gallery opening was in early May. The 6-piece show, which was not the solo show, but was, as Daniel had predicted, the beginning of a conversation about the solo show. Daniel wore a jacket and showed up exactly on time and stood in front of each piece for what Nora later told him was an almost uncomfortable amount of time. "I was reading them," he said. "People usually just look, I know, but you put things in there. I wanted to find all of them." She looked at him for a long moment under the gallery lights. Eleanor came on a good day and stood next to the painting of the fire hydrant pigeon for so long that the gallery owner came over and asked if she wanted information about acquiring it. "My son is going to buy it," Eleanor said, and then looked at Daniel. He bought it. May ended and moved into June without anything being said that changed the shape of what they were, and yet everything had shifted in increments too small to point to. Nora stopped taking the outside stairs to the apartment and started coming through the kitchen. Daniel started cooking on Sundays, badly at first, and then less badly. Makey declared herself the official taster, a role she executed with genuine rigor and the kind of critical feedback that would have been brutal from an adult, and was somehow just accurate from a 4-year-old. On a Tuesday in late June, Nora came home from an evening shift at the bakery to find Daniel and Makey in the garden, in the near dark, Makey in her pajamas, both of them lying on their backs looking up at the sky. "There's a satellite," Makey explained. "We've been watching it." Nora sat down on the cold stone next to them. She looked up. Daniel pointed and she found it, a slow-moving bright point crossing the sky with more patience than anything either of them had. "I never knew you could just see them," she said quietly. "Most people don't look," Daniel said. They watched until Makey fell asleep between them, her hand open on the grass. Neither of them moved right away. The satellite had long passed. The city hummed around them. Daniel said, without looking away from the sky, "I don't want this to be a temporary arrangement." Nora was quiet. "I know I'm not saying this in a way that makes it easy to answer," he said. "No," she said. "You're not. I'm still working on that." She turned her head and looked at him in the dark. He was looking at her now. "I know you are," she said. She did not say yes that night. She also did not say no, and Daniel, who had spent his entire life optimizing for certainty, found that the space between those two things was something he could live in, something he wanted to live in, because she was in it with him. 2 weeks later, she said yes, not to a contract, not to an arrangement, to the question he had finally learned how to ask, which was not "what can I offer you," but simply, "can I be someone you let in?" Makey, informed of this development over breakfast, received it with the composure of someone who had seen this coming for months. "Gerald called it in February," she said, and ate her graham cracker. The solo show opened in October, 12 paintings in a light-filled room on Hayes Street. Daniel's mother stood in front of the large centerpiece, a painting of a Pacific Heights garden in near dark, 2 figures barely visible among the plants, both looking up, and held Daniel's hand for a long time without saying anything. He didn't need her to. Nora watched from across the room as Eleanor leaned briefly against her son's shoulder, and something in her chest settled that had not been still in a very long time. Some things can't be contracted into existence. Some things arrive on a Tuesday morning on a gray San Francisco sidewalk and ask you to stop and pay attention, and the only people who receive them are the ones who are still enough for one unexpected moment to look up.